Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. We have a lot to get through. It's been a very busy week, so let's just dive in. We begin with part 2 on our 2-part exploration of declining confidence, both business and household, in the Chinese economy within China itself. What we cover here should be treated as supplementary to part 1 in yesterday's video, where we examined Chinese adult confidence in their economy hitting record lows, with 4 out of every 5 members of Generation Z having a negative outlook on their economy. We also saw that Fred Hu, a veteran China investor, expressed in Singapore this week that confidence among entrepreneurs, in his opinion, incredibly, is at its worst levels since the end of the Mao era, and called for urgent reforms. He's not the only one making these calls too. This week, in a special editorial called "China's Reform Movement Urgently Needs Another Breakthrough," Chinese financial media outlet editors at Caixin wrote that with China facing a multitude of economic and societal challenges, there is hope that there will be another breakthrough in the reform effort like the one made 10 years ago at the third plenum of the party's 18th Central Committee. It was at that session which saw the endorsement of the decision on major issues concerning comprehensively deepening reforms, which was at the time unprecedented in scope and ambition, as it spanned 60 articles and more than 300 reform measures. The editorial then becomes unusually critical of policies under the current leadership, arguing, quote, "On the path of reform, the most crucial challenge is to remain vigilant against those reforms that exist only in words or on paper. Some officials claim to champion reform while acting in ways that defy its spirit. There have been times when contradictory policies have been enacted, especially during the pandemic. Excessive micro-interventions, blanket policies, and escalating requirements have caused severe hardship for market entities. True reform not only involves new initiatives, but also correcting past mistakes. Market entities are eagerly awaiting some departments and local governments to rectify the chaos and reverse erroneous policies." End quote. Like I said, this sort of criticism and harsh words are unusual in a domestic publication, especially one as widely read as Caixin. This week too, the excellent Substack account, China Charts, published a translation of a post that tries to predict the future based off the official readout of the recent Central Financial Work Conference. The China Charts account explains why it published this by expressing, quote, "Broadly within China, there is a deep feeling that things are changing and many are struggling to understand the new direction. This piece gives some very pessimistic ideas of where China may be headed. As of this writing, the post has been read hundreds of thousands of times. That the post is resonating with so many is a sign of very low confidence." End quote. After some unpacking of the article, the account concludes, quote, "To sum up, in the future, the economy will no longer be dominated by the market, nor by economic laws, nor by professionals, but by the will of administrative agencies. The general tone of the entire article is that the current problems and risks are related to the previous financial liberalization and the wrong use of financial leverage tools. The future financial market will be a market that recycles or recovers power that is dominated by government administration." End quote. Now, while we're on part 1, let's examine one more interesting development on this topic, that of confidence in the economy. The same US-based Morning Consult report, which we examined yesterday, also published survey data this week on adult Chinese attitudes towards the United States. As we can see, the results, if accurate, are interesting and significant. After several years of spiraling bilateral relations and deepening distrust, attitudes in China have suddenly become friendlier towards the US. In April 2022, more than 80% of Chinese respondents said they viewed the US as an enemy. But by October 2023, that number has now fallen to less than 50%, almost the same level as friendly views. What is going on? Some commentators have argued that this is a sign that the efforts of US and Chinese leaders to stabilize relations are bearing fruit. However, if viewers will permit me to share my personal view, and this is just my personal view, so please do take it with a grain of salt, I would just make the following observations. We know from following state media coverage of the bilateral relationship that anti-American messaging remains very strong. Much of the combative and antagonistic popular feelings coming from China in recent years has in large part been fueled by a deep sense of triumphalism and national pride. Thus, it could well be that this surveyed increase in positive attitudes towards the United States is not so much about Chinese views towards the US per se, but more about their previous confidence in their own economy and wider system being undermined. Indeed, the same Morning Consult survey found that more than 75% of Chinese respondents said that they were concerned about US-China tensions, and more than 75% also said that both sides should work to resolve those tensions. So perhaps the increase in Chinese adults saying that the US should be a friend or ally rather than an enemy is perhaps more a reflection of growing fear than friendliness. Now, all of this is just a hypothesis, of course. We will continue following developments as they happen and see where things go in this space. Next up, a ransomware attack on China's largest bank has disrupted the US Treasury market by forcing clients of the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China to reroute trades. A cyber gang called Lockbit is suspected of targeting the massive Chinese bank, the world's largest lender by assets. UK-based Financial Times explains in a report today that the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association in the US first told members on Wednesday that ICBC had been hit by ransomware software, which paralyzes computer systems unless a payment is made. The attack prevented ICBC from settling treasury trades on behalf of other market participants, explains the outlet, with some equity trades also affected. Market participants, including hedge funds, rerouted trades because of the disruption, and the attack had some effect on treasury market liquidity, but it was not impairing the market's overall functioning. An executive at a large bank that clears US treasuries expressed to the outlet, quote, "This is a large party on the fixed income clearing corporation, so it is certainly of major concern," end quote, and potentially impacting liquidity of US treasuries. Analysts are still debating the implications of all this. Quote, "The attack was nicely timed for Vice Premier He Feng's arrival in the US for meetings with US Treasury Secretary Yellen. If there is a Russian nexus to this attack, will the PRC send a message to Putin about getting control of his criminals? Is this a reminder of how tightly linked the top PRC banks are to the US and therefore global system, and why multiple US administrations who have shown a proclivity for sanctions have all blinked when it came to the possibility of sanctioning any major PRC banks?" End quote. Next up, we explore the complex web of China's development financing. If you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. China Update is now on Twitter or X at Tony China Update. There is also a link in the description below. I just want to take this opportunity once again to thank everyone for the ongoing support. It's a true pleasure to make these videos for you all every day. If you want to help this channel grow, one of the best ways is to share this video with people who you think would get some value from it, and subscribing is a big help too. And I hope to continue producing these episodes free and open for all 6 days a week. If you want to financially support the channel relies primarily on subscriber support to keep going. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below. Once again, thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Finally for today, this week Aid Data, a research lab at US-based William and Mary Global Research Institute, published a massive 400-page plus report called Belt and Road Reboot, Beijing's Bid to De-Risk Its Global Infrastructure Initiative, The report is fairly comprehensive and is probably one of the best explorations to date on the nature, scale and scope of China's overseas development financing program. The report is a beast of a document and well worth a read for anyone interested in this space. It draws upon data from over 20,000 projects across 165 low and middle income countries, supported by loans and grants from China worth more than $1.3 trillion, making China the world's #1 source of international development finance. Obviously, we do not have the room here to unpack the 400 pages, but the report does make several significant observations which are worth our attention here. In 2021, China provided aid and loans worth $79 billion to low and middle income nations, more than the $61 billion provided by the US. The World Bank that year made commitments worth around $53 billion. In the period between 2013 and 2017, Beijing averaged around $117 billion each year in financing to developing countries, outpacing Washington's spending nearly 3-1, much higher than previously thought. A separate US-based Rand Corporation study based on aid data numbers and other sources, also published this week, estimates that in that period, China's state-run banks and companies channeled nearly 6 times as much money in projects as the US allocated. It says the acceleration of Chinese support to the developing world during the Xi era has, quote, upended the world of development assistance, end quote. However, rescue loans climbed to 58% of China's lending to low and middle income countries from 2021, from 5% in 2013. Very much a troubling turn for Chinese policymakers. Though despite this, quote, Beijing is not going to stand by and watch its flagship global infrastructure initiative crash and burn. It is finding its footing as the international crisis manager and refocusing its time and money on troubled projects, distressed borrowers, and sources of public backlash in the global south. I think the G7 has underestimated Beijing's level of ambition. In the short run, it is firefighting, but it is also working behind the scenes to future-proof the Belt and Road Initiative by putting in place stronger loan repayment and project implementation guardrails, end quote. We end today's video by looking at several salient observations from the executive summary of the report, which we are now quoting excerpts of directly. 1. Contrary to the conventional wisdom, Beijing's annual international development finance commitments have not plummeted to nearly zero. It remains the world's single largest official source of international development finance. 2. Beijing is navigating an unfamiliar and uncomfortable role as the world's largest official debt collector. 55% of its loans to low and middle income countries have already entered their principal repayment periods, and this figure will increase to 75% by 2030. Total outstanding debt, including principal but excluding interest, from borrowers in the developing world to China is at least $1.1 trillion and potentially even as high as $1.5 trillion in nominal US dollars. Beijing is finding its footing as an international debt collector at a time when many of its biggest borrowers are illiquid or insolvent. Aid data estimates that 80% of China's overseas lending portfolio in the developing world is currently supporting countries in financial distress. Overdue repayments to China are also soaring in absolute terms and as a proportion of total overdue loan repayments to official creditors. 3. Beijing's public approval rating in the developing world plunged from 56% in 2019 to 40% in 2021. Washington, on the other hand, has seen its public approval rating rise and opened up a 14 percentage point advantage over Beijing. Across the developing world, China has also struggled to maintain a razor-thin lead over the US in media coverage favorability. Yet it has proven very capable of winning and retaining the foreign policy support of governing elites. Despite these challenges, the report also concludes, 4. Beijing has launched a far-reaching effort to de-risk the Belt and Road Initiative by refocusing its time, money and attention on distressed borrowers, troubled projects and sources of public backlash in the Global South. It is learning from its mistakes and becoming an increasingly adept international crisis manager. The G7 should not underestimate the ambition of China's ongoing effort to future-proof its flagship global infrastructure initiative. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great Friday, and I will see you all tomorrow.